Civilizations have fallen to a silent, creeping enemy. While empires crumbled under drought and shifting skies, a handful of vital pathways did the unthinkable. They not only survived climate collapse, they used it to redraw the entire map of global power. By the end of this journey, you will possess a forgotten blueprint for resilience, one written in the sands of ancient deserts and the logs of monsoon ships. How did a network of caravan tracks outlast the mighty kingdom that built it? What secret allowed maritime traders to thrive while inland capitals starved? The answers reveal a stunning truth about human ingenuity in the face of planetary change. What do you believe is the true mark of a civilization that endures? This pressure was not a sudden storm but a slow, relentless turning of the world. To understand the survival of these trade routes, we must first grasp the sheer scale of the disaster they endured. Climate collapse in the ancient world was not a single cataclysm but a creeping transformation. It was the life-giving rains failing, season after season, for decades. It was rivers shrinking in their beds, their fertile floodplains turning to dust. It was the slow, unstoppable advance of deserts, swallowing farmlands and entire villages whole. The very ecological foundation upon which great kingdoms were built simply crumbled away. One of the most profound examples began around 4,200 years ago, a period scientists call the 4.2 Kiloyear Event. This was a mega-drought of staggering proportions, a planetary shift that lasted for centuries. Its fingerprints are found in ice cores, in ancient lake beds, and tragically, in the ruins of empires. In Mesopotamia, the mighty Akkadian Empire, which once stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, shattered. Their cuneiform tablets speak not of invasion, but of famine. They describe a land where the salt winds blew, where no crops grew, and where people faced desperate hardship. Far to the west along the Nile, the old kingdom of Egypt, the age of the pyramid builders, also faltered. The Nile's annual flood, that predictable miracle of fertility, became erratic and weak. The result was not a single bad harvest, but a century of instability that dissolved the pharaoh's central authority, plunging the region into a time later Egyptians would remember as one of profound difficulty. This was the new, terrifying baseline. The rules of survival had been rewritten. A civilization could no longer rely on the land that had sustained its ancestors. This is the immense pressure cooker into which our surviving trade networks were thrust. Their entire world was undergoing a fundamental reorganization. So the question becomes breathtakingly clear. When the agricultural heartlands that feed mighty capitals wither and die, what happens to the delicate threads of commerce that connect them? Do they snap or do they somehow grow stronger? The answer lies in a fundamental difference between an empire and a network, a lesson written in the shifting sands. The true survivors understood that survival was not a static condition, but a dynamic process. For a trade route facing climate collapse, enduring meant something far more profound than simply having a few merchants still walking a dusty path. It meant adaptation, a constant recalibration to a changing world. It meant diversification, never putting all your goods in one basket or relying on a single commodity from a single region that might fail. And above all, it meant strategic reinvention, finding new purposes when old ones vanished. To see this, we must contrast two very different kinds of pathways. Picture a fragile route, a single thread stretching from a silver mine to a royal treasury. This route exists for one reason, to move one precious thing. If the mine plays out, or if the kingdom that craves the silver falls, that thread is cut. It has no other purpose, no other connections. It is a lifeline, but a terribly vulnerable one. Now contrast that with a resilient network. This is not a single line, but a web. Think of a great city like Palmyra in the Syrian desert, or a port like Cambay on the Indian coast. These were nodes in a vast, interconnected system. Caravans arrived from a dozen different directions, carrying spices, textiles, glass, incense, and ideas. If drought closed one overland path, merchants could shift to another. If political turmoil made one port dangerous, ships could sail to a different harbor. The network itself was the asset, its value embedded in its countless connections and its breathtaking flexibility. But how did such a complex system not simply fall into chaos when the world grew unstable? This is where a crucial, often overlooked element comes in, something scholars call social memory. This was the living library carried not in clay tablets, but in the minds of trading families and the protocols of merchant guilds. It was the preserved knowledge, passed from parent to child and captain to pilot, of alternative mountain passes, of hidden desert wells that only flowed in certain seasons, of which local chieftain valued porcelain over pearls. This was the intellectual and social infrastructure of trade. A ship captain knew the monsoon patterns not just from one voyage, but from the collective experience of generations. A caravan master knew where to find shelter not because of a map, but because his grandfather had done business there. This deep, inherited knowledge allowed these networks to bend without breaking. They could reroute around disaster because they remembered the paths less traveled. By examining these principles, the blueprint for endurance starts to come into focus. Resilience was not found in stone monuments or grand armies, but in adaptable webs and remembered wisdom. So, if a network could reroute, where did it go when its old centers of power were dying? The answer lies in a quiet, profound migration of influence from the heart of empires out to their forgotten edges. The desert itself was rewriting the rules of geography. While mighty river valleys faltered, another kind of pathway was being carved, not through fertile land, but directly across the most forbidding terrain imaginable. The Sahara, often seen as a permanent barrier, was in fact a dynamic, expanding force. As the planet dried, its dunes marched southward, pressing against the lush Sahel. For communities living on this edge, the choice was stark: adapt to the encroaching sands or face dispersal. From this immense pressure emerged a civilization that turned the desert's logic on its head, the Garamantes. Far from being nomads lost in the wastes, they were sophisticated engineers who mastered the art of harvesting the desert's most hidden resource, water. They constructed vast underground networks of tunnels and wells known as foggaras, tapping into ancient aquifers to transform isolated patches of land into flourishing oasis hubs. These were not mere watering holes, they were the first permanent nodes in a network that would span a continent. The knowledge of the Garamantes, their understanding of hidden water and desert survival, did not vanish with their eventual decline. It became the foundational blueprint, a precious social memory passed down and perfected. The true transformation of the Sahara from a graveyard into a corridor, however, required one more revolutionary adaptation: the camel. Introduced around 2,000 years ago, these animals were the ultimate desert vessels. They could travel for days without water, carry immense loads, and traverse soft sands that would swallow carts and horses. With a camel and the inherited wisdom of oasis management, the impossible became routine. Caravans of hundreds, even thousands, of these ships of the desert began to move along invisible highways defined by secret wells and seasonal pastures. They carried salt from the northern deserts to the gold-rich kingdoms of West Africa like Ghana and Mali, and returned south with textiles, books, and copper. This was not a simple exchange of goods, it was a circuit of life that connected worlds. The Trans-Saharan routes survived and thrived precisely because they were born of adaptation. They existed because of the desert's harshness, not in spite of it. While agricultural empires crumbled when the rains failed, this network drew its strength from the very element that destroyed others: scarcity. Its hubs were the oases, places of resilience that could not be starved out by drought. Its currency was mobility and deep environmental knowledge. So, as the map of power was redrawn by climate, a new axis of influence emerged, running not along rivers but across the sea of sand. But what of the other great arena of ancient trade, the boundless ocean? If the desert demanded mastery of scarcity, the sea presented a mirror image challenge, a terrifying abundance of unpredictability. While the desert mastered scarcity, another landscape offered a different kind of freedom, the boundless sea of grass. To truly understand the Silk Road's endurance, we must look beyond its famous oasis towns and mountain passes to the vast, rolling steppes of Eurasia. This was the domain of the horse and of the nomadic confederations who turned mobility into an art form. For centuries, empires like China viewed the steppe with dread, a source of relentless raids from peoples like the Xiongnu. But from a trade perspective, these grasslands were not a barrier, they were a superhighway. This was Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, the Grassland Silk Road, a northern corridor that would prove to be the network's lifeline during some of its greatest crises. When climatic shifts like the late antique Little Ice Age brought drought and punishing dust storms to the settled agricultural regions of Central Asia, the southern branches of the Silk Road could choke. Caravanserais stood empty and cities like Samarkand faced immense hardship. Yet high on the steppe, a different rhythm continued. The nomadic pastoralists with their herds of sheep, goats, and most importantly, horses, were not tied to any single patch of earth. Their entire economy and society were built around movement. A bad season in one valley simply meant migrating to another. This profound adaptability made their trade logistics incredibly resilient. They did not rely on fixed roads or vulnerable supply depots. Instead, they operated a decentralized, relay-based network. Goods like Chinese silk, Central Asian spices, and Mediterranean glass would pass from one tribal group to another, moving with the seasons and the herds. A bolt of silk might travel from a Chinese frontier town into the hands of a Xiongnu trader, then be passed west to a Sogdian merchant, and finally reach a Byzantine envoy, all without a single merchant making the entire journey. This system was fluid, redundant, and almost impossible to disrupt. Even if conflict or drought closed one segment, the web of connections could reroute commerce along a different tribal alliance. The steppe corridor ensured that ideas and technologies kept moving too. Stirrups, composite bows, and even musical instruments traveled these grassy waves, reshaping empires far away. So, while history often remembers the nomads as destroyers of civilizations, in the grand story of trade resilience, they were its vital guardians. They maintained the flow of goods when settled societies could not, proving that sometimes the most enduring power is not held in a walled city, but carried on horseback. This revelation from the grasslands leads us to a final, pivotal question. If resilience was found in the desert's scarcity and the steppe's mobility, what happened when these two worlds of trade, the land and the sea, were forced into a final, direct confrontation? The open ocean presented a rhythm far more reliable than any king or harvest. While empires rose and fell to the whims of rainfall, the Indian Ocean breathed with a predictable, powerful pulse, the monsoon winds. For half the year, the winds blew steadily from the southwest, pushing ships from East Africa toward India and beyond. Then, as if on a celestial schedule, they reversed, flowing from the northeast to carry those same vessels home. Ancient mariners did not just use this system, they built a civilization upon it. From the Phoenicians exploring distant coasts to the Austronesian voyagers who settled islands from Madagascar to Polynesia, these were the first true globalists. Their resilience was etched not in stone, but in the very design of their ships and the depth of their celestial knowledge. They possessed an oral almanac of stars, currents, and cloud formations, allowing them to navigate vast, featureless blue with a confidence that land-based empires could only envy. This mastery of the monsoon created a network with a stunning advantage. When drought gripped the interior of India or Mesopotamia, when river ports silted up and caravan traffic slowed, the maritime highway remained gloriously open. The sea cared not for the failure of wheat or millet. Its lanes were defined by wind, not water. The resilience of this web lay in its beautiful, decentralized design. A ship from Oman did not have to sail all the way to China. It could stop at a port in India, exchange its goods, and let another vessel carry them eastward. The network was a chain of countless links, with dozens of entry and exit points like Zanzibar, Cambay, Malacca, and Gwangju. If conflict or hardship closed one port, commerce simply flowed to the next. This was not a single vulnerable road, but a sprawling, redundant mesh. Most profoundly, the monsoon network traded in resilience itself. It was a conduit for life-giving adaptation. Imagine a ship carrying not just silk and spices, but sacks of drought-resistant sorghum from Africa to India, or fast-maturing champa rice from Vietnam to China. These were genetic libraries on the move, offering agricultural solutions to communities facing a changing climate. They exchanged sailing technologies too, like the lateen sail that could catch the wind from any angle, or the balanced lug sail of Southeast Asia. This constant sharing of knowledge and biological resources created an intercontinental web that climate shocks could not sever. It adapted by weaving itself ever more tightly into the fabric of many different societies, from the Swahili coast to the Indonesian archipelago. So, as we trace these three surviving networks, a pattern solidifies into a principle. The desert thrived on mastering scarcity. The steppe flourished through relentless mobility. And the ocean built an unbreakable web upon predictable change. Each found strength not in fighting the new world, but in flowing with its currents. This leaves us with a final, transformative thought. If these ancient pathways could not only endure collapse but emerge stronger, what does their blueprint tell us about the nature of true power in an unstable world? Far to the north, beneath a canopy of ancient pine and birch, another kind of treasure was being formed. While the great southern empires contended with drought, the cold, damp forests of prehistoric Europe held within them a golden, translucent secret. Amber, the fossilized resin of trees that fell millions of years ago, was more than a pretty stone. It was a substance believed to capture the very light of the sun, holding mystical warmth and protective power. From the shores of the Baltic Sea, a desire for this magical material carved one of history's most durable pathways, the Amber Road. This route reveals a stunning truth, that resilience could be forged not in the heart of fertile empires, but in the specialized trade of a single, precious commodity from a seemingly marginal land. The survival of this network defied the logic of its environment. Northern Europe was not a land of predictable harvests or gentle climates. It was a world of deep winters, dense, trackless forests, and communities living in a delicate balance with their surroundings. Yet the Amber Road thrived through centuries of climatic shifts, from warming periods that opened new paths to cooling eras that pushed glaciers south. Its endurance was anchored in two powerful, unchanging facts. First, the boreal forests themselves, while harsh, were remarkably stable ecological systems compared to the failing farmlands of the Mediterranean. They provided a consistent source of the material, washed ashore by the sea or mined from ancient deposits known only to local tribes. Second, and more crucially, the demand for amber was virtually insatiable and immune to economic collapse. For the Germanic and Baltic tribes who initially controlled its source, amber was a key to prestige and ritual. For the civilizations to the south, particularly the Romans, it was a substance of profound allure. They believed it could ward off illness, carry the prayers of the living to the gods, and even preserve life itself. as insects trapped within it seemed frozen in time. This was not a trade in a practical necessity like grain, but in perceived magic and eternal beauty, markets that rarely crash. This flow of golden resin created a two-way river of exchange that transformed Europe. Southbound caravans and riverboats carried raw amber nuggets toward the Roman frontier. In return, a flood of Roman silver, bronze vessels, exquisite glassware, and advanced metal tools flowed north. But the road carried more than objects. It transmitted technologies like the potter's wheel and advanced ironworking. It moved artistic styles and, inevitably, ideas. A chieftain in modern-day Poland might be buried with a Roman-made brooch, a locally crafted amber bead, and a Celtic-inspired torque, a personal museum of a connected continent. The Amber Road demonstrates that a network did not need to be a vast, all-purpose web like the Indian Ocean system to be resilient. It could be a narrow, deep, and incredibly strong thread, connecting two very different worlds through a mutual obsession. Its strength lay in its specialization and the irreplaceable nature of its core commodity. While political powers rose and fell along its length, the desire for that piece of captured sunlight from the northern forests never faded. This prompts a final, unifying reflection. From the Sahara's salt to the steppe's silk, from the monsoon's spices to the Baltic's amber, these surviving routes all shared a common, invisible architecture. They were built not on the power of empires, but on the deeper, more enduring logic of ecology, desire, and human connection. These golden threads of trade needed anchors in a storm. Across the deserts and mountains, at the precise points where geography seemed most forbidding, humanity built its most ingenious refuges. Cities like Palmyra in Syria, Petra in Jordan, and Samarkand in Uzbekistan were not accidental stops. They were deliberate, masterfully engineered ecosystems, climate havens carved from stone and sand. Their survival, and thus the survival of the networks they served, hinged on a single, sacred principle: the command of water. In a world growing drier, these cities became virtuosos of conservation. They did not merely find water, they choreographed its every move. Beneath the sun-baked streets of places like ancient Persia and Central Asia lay the Qanat, a gravity-fed marvel. Workers would dig a mother well into a distant mountain aquifer, then tunnel a gently sloping underground channel for miles, bringing a cool, steady stream directly to the city's heart and its surrounding fields, all without a single drop lost to evaporation. On the surface, every contour of the land was put to work. Elaborate systems of cisterns captured rare rainfall. Hillsides were sculpted into vast staircases of terraced gardens, slowing erosion and creating microclimates where fruit trees and vegetables could flourish. A city like Petra, hidden within rose-red cliffs, turned its canyon walls into a massive water catchment system, channeling flash floods through a complex network of dams and channels into monumental reservoirs. This was not just urban planning, it was ecological alchemy. They transformed their isolated locations into green islands of shocking abundance. And when the wider regional climate became more hostile, when droughts stretched for years and lesser settlements were abandoned, these havens did not just persist, they thrived. Their very stability became a magnet. The wealth of passing caravans concentrated there, libraries and workshops filled with knowledge from across the known world. Political power, once dispersed across fertile valleys, now coalesced around these fortified oases. A merchant arriving at the gates of Palmyra after weeks in the lethal desert was not just finding a place to drink. He was entering a nerve center of global exchange, a repository of safe passage agreements, market prices, and news from Rome to the Indus Valley. The Oasis city guaranteed the caravan a destination, and the caravan guaranteed the city its purpose. This symbiotic relationship created a profound form of network resilience. Even if an entire segment of a route fell into disuse due to war or extreme drought, The survival of these key nodes meant the knowledge and infrastructure of trade remained intact, ready to reactivate when conditions improved. They were the durable knots in the net, holding the entire web together even if some threads went slack. So we see that the true architecture of endurance was not just in the paths themselves, but in these sanctuaries along the way. They turned catastrophic scarcity into a source of concentrated power, proving that in an age of collapse, the greatest fortune was not gold, but a reliable cup of water. A ship's sail is not merely a piece of cloth, but a profound statement of philosophy. On the open ocean, survival demanded a direct conversation with the wind itself, and ancient mariners learned to speak its language with breathtaking fluency. In the Indian Ocean, the lateen sail revolutionized this dialogue. This triangular sail, mounted on a long yard at a sharp angle to the mast, was a masterpiece of aerodynamics. Unlike a simple square sail that could only really catch a wind blowing from behind, the lateen could be adjusted to harness the wind from almost any direction. It allowed the graceful D-house to tack against the prevailing monsoon, to zigzag their way forward even when the wind seemed to oppose them. This was not just about speed, it was about strategic freedom. If a once friendly port was now plagued by conflict or a newly formed sandbar, a captain could chart a different course, confident his vessel could handle the altered winds. Contrast this with the workhorse of the Mediterranean, the Roman corbitor. This was a vessel built for capacity and stability, a floating warehouse with a deep, rounded hull designed to carry staggering loads of grain, olive oil, and amphorae across predictable sea lanes. Its strength was in its volume, not its agility. Each design, the nimble D-howe and the steadfast corbitor, represented a perfect adaptation to its own maritime world. But to use these tools, you first had to know where you were on a featureless blue plain. This is where the second pillar of maritime resilience was built, not from wood and rope, but from mathematics and memory. Celestial navigation turned the night sky into a fixed, reliable map. Arab and Indian navigators used the camel, a simple wooden board and a knotted string, to measure the altitude of the North Star above the horizon, giving them their latitude. Later, the astrolabe and cross staff brought even greater precision. Yet perhaps the most profound system belonged to the Polynesian voyagers, who crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific without any metal instruments at all. Theirs was a science of deep observation, an oral encyclopedia passed down through generations of navigators, the Po. They memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars. They could read subtle shifts in ocean swell patterns, feeling the reflection of distant islands in the water's rhythm. They watched the flight paths of birds and the composition of clouds on the horizon, each a signpost to land. This knowledge was a living, breathing survival tool. When climatic shifts, like the medieval warm period, altered prevailing wind patterns or ocean currents, these master navigators could decode the new seascape. They could find new islands or rediscover old ones along changed routes, keeping their networks of exchange and migration vibrantly alive. The true lesson here is that the resilience of sea trade was engineered. It was built into the very curve of a sail and etched into the memory of a star path. These technologies ensured that when the world changed, the pathways of the ocean could bend and flex without breaking. The true currency of resilience was often a simple, unglamorous mineral. While the history books celebrate the silk and spices that made kings rich, the networks that endured through climate collapse traded in something far more fundamental: the necessities of life itself. These were the commodities that guaranteed survival, creating a constant, unbreakable demand that political chaos could not erase. Picture a Saharan caravan, a line of camels a mile long, trudging across endless dunes. Their precious cargo was not gold or ivory, but massive slabs of salt mined from the blistering heart of the desert. To us, salt is a cheap seasoning. In the ancient world, it was a biological imperative and the only reliable method to preserve food through lean seasons. The salt trade from centers like Taghaza to the gold-rich kingdoms of West Africa was an exchange of survival for wealth, a circuit that could not be broken because both sides held what the other could not live without. Similarly, the Roman empires via Salaria, the Salt Road, was a testament to this logic, a highway built specifically to transport this vital mineral from the coastal marshes to the heart of the peninsula. This trade in essentials created a powerful economic floor. Even when luxury markets crashed during a drought or a war, the need for salt, for grain, for basic tools persisted. This baseline demand ensured that the physical infrastructure of trade, the caravan trails, the port facilities, the knowledge of routes, never fell completely into disuse. The merchants, guides, and animal handlers remained in business, their networks kept warm by the steady flow of humble goods. This principle extended to the very materials that made trade possible. Consider the shipbuilding supplies of the ancient Mediterranean. The great forests of Lebanon were not just scenic, they were strategic reserves of cedar, the perfect timber for durable hulls. From other regions came pitch and tar, the vital sealants that kept those hulls watertight. A port city might have its spice trade disrupted by a monsoon shift, but its shipyards would still need timber and pitch to repair fishing boats and coastal traders. This trade in industrial essentials meant the expertise of sailors, carpenters, and merchants was continuously employed, preserving the human capital necessary to restart long-distance commerce the moment opportunity returned. Perhaps the most profound exchange of all was in genetic resilience, the trade of life itself. Along African routes, drought-resistant grains like millet and sorghum moved between communities. When one region's staple crop failed, seeds from another, adapted to different conditions, offered a chance to replant and endure. The Champa rice variety, which matured quickly and could thrive in poor soil, traveled from Vietnam to China, helping populations weather unpredictable growing seasons. This was a trade not in objects but in future harvests, in the very possibility of continuity. So, while the silks adorned the powerful and the spices flavored their feasts, it was the salt, the grain, and the timber that silently upheld the entire system. They provided the relentless, quiet hum of commerce that kept the lights on in the caravanserais and the harbors clear, ensuring that when the world stabilized, the pathways for grand ambitions were still there, patiently waiting. Silk and spices could not move on goodwill alone. Beyond the clever ships and the hidden oases lay a harder, more pragmatic reality. For a merchant facing 1,000 miles of wilderness, the greatest threat was not the desert sun or the mountain pass, but the unpredictable people who controlled them. The survival of trade, therefore, demanded a political invention, a system to manufacture safety where none naturally existed. This was the unspoken economy of protection, a delicate dance of diplomacy, tribute, and calculated alliance that turned lawless frontiers into governed corridors. Consider the journey of a Sogdian merchant caravan leaving the relative safety of Samarkand for the markets of China. Their goods were insured long before the concept existed, not by a parchment contract, but through a web of pre-arranged relationships. They would hire local guides from the very nomadic tribes whose territories they needed to cross, paying not just for their knowledge of the land, but for their kinship as escorts. A band of raiders was far less likely to attack a train accompanied by their own chieftain's nephew. This was protection purchased in advance, a subscription fee for safe passage woven into the cost of doing business. On a grander scale, empires formalized this logic into high diplomacy. The Byzantine Empire, forever anxious about its eastern frontier, cultivated a powerful alliance with the Ghassanids, a Christian Arab federation. In exchange for annual subsidies of gold and prestigious titles, the Ghassanids acted as a buffer state and a guardian of the trade routes flowing into Byzantine Syria. They policed the desert, ensuring caravans from the south could reach imperial cities unmolested. This was not charity, it was strategic outsourcing. The Byzantines paid for stability, and the Ghassanids gained wealth and legitimacy, a partnership that endured for centuries because it served both parties' survival. Perhaps the most sophisticated system was the Chinese tributary system. Neighboring states and distant trading partners would send envoys to the Chinese emperor bearing gifts of local treasures, a symbolic act of submission. In return, the emperor would bestow upon them even more lavish gifts, silk, lacquerware, and official seals of recognition, and crucially, the right to trade within the empire's borders. This elegant ritual transformed potential rivals into invested stakeholders. A kingdom that participated in the tributary system had a direct economic interest in the stability of the routes leading to and from China. They became de facto guardians of the very corridors that enriched them. These frameworks, from hired guards to imperial treaties, created something priceless in an unstable world: predictability. They institutionalized risk. A merchant might grumble about the taxes paid to a local lord or the cost of hiring nomadic escorts, but he could calculate that cost. It was a known expense, far preferable to the utter ruin of a hijacked caravan. This political layer turned chaotic, contested spaces into something resembling a regulated marketplace. Environmental stress or regional conflict might increase the price of protection, but the system itself, this network of mutual interest, would bend and adapt rather than shatter. The safe passage was not a natural right but a carefully constructed commodity, and its continuous trade was the silent heartbeat that kept the ancient world connected. A caravan carried more than silk and spices in its saddlebags. Alongside bolts of cloth and sacks of pepper traveled ideas that would outlast kingdoms and reshape continents. This cultural cargo, the exchange of beliefs, art, and language, became one of the most powerful stabilizing forces a trade network could possess. When climate stress frayed political bonds, these shared identities provided a new kind of glue, holding disparate communities together with a common purpose that transcended profit. The spread of Buddhism along the Silk Road offers a profound example. As merchants and monks traveled from India through Central Asia and into China, they did not walk alone. They carried sutras, the teachings of the Buddha, translated into many tongues. In oasis cities like Dunhuang, they carved entire monasteries into cliff faces, creating libraries of faith and art that served as way stations for the soul. Buddhism introduced a universal ethical framework, a concept of compassion and karma that could be understood from Gandhara to Chang'an. For a Sogdian merchant and a Chinese official, a shared reverence for the same teachings created an immediate basis for trust. It meant they operated under a common moral compass, which made complex contracts and credit agreements possible across vast distances. This shared belief system effectively built an invisible infrastructure of ethics that made commerce smoother and more reliable. A similar transformation occurred along the Trans-Saharan routes with the gradual spread of Islam. As Muslim scholars and traders traveled south, they brought with them the Arabic script, a new legal code based on the Quran, and a cosmopolitan identity connected to a wider world of learning. Timbuktu, that legendary city at the desert's edge, did not become a center of wealth because of gold alone. It became a beacon of knowledge, home to vast libraries and universities where law, astronomy, and medicine were debated in Arabic, the lingua franca of scholarship and trade from Cordoba to Kilwa. This common language of commerce and law was revolutionary. A trader from Fez in Morocco could negotiate with a merchant in Timbuktu using shared legal concepts and a mutually understood script, reducing the risk of misunderstanding and conflict. In times of severe hardship, when a drought might pit community against community for scarce resources, this shared cultural identity could mean the difference between abandonment and mutual aid. A Muslim caravan stranded at a distant well might receive assistance from a local community that shared its faith, not because of a formal treaty, but because of a deeper kinship. The route itself became a cultural entity, a corridor of connected values worth preserving for its own sake. This turned resilience from a matter of logistics into a matter of shared destiny. The network was no longer just a path for goods, it was a vessel for a way of life, and that was something people would fight much harder to maintain. Sometimes the greatest leaps forward begin with a river choking on its own success. The fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, were nourished by the Tigris and Euphrates, but that gift came with a curse. Centuries of irrigation left the soil poisoned by salt, a process called salinization, while the rivers themselves silted up, becoming too shallow for the large barges that once carried grain and timber. The very waterways that built empires were now failing them. Yet, from this crisis, a pivot was born. Rather than fighting a losing battle against the dying rivers, merchants and shipwrights looked south to the deep, blue waters of the Persian Gulf. The solution was not to repair the old system, but to transcend it. They began constructing vessels with a deeper draft, ships that could not navigate the shallow, silted rivers but were perfectly suited for the open Gulf. These new ships could carry heavier cargoes of copper from Oman, hardwoods from India, and gems from beyond. The collapse of the inland river trade did not end commerce. It simply pushed it offshore, spurring a maritime revolution that would eventually link Mesopotamia to the vast Indian Ocean network. This was innovation forced by failure, a technological leap made possible only because the old way became impossible. A similar story of forced ingenuity unfolded far to the east, in the heart of Asia. The Tarim Basin, a crucial junction of the Silk Road, was drying out. Its oasis towns, dependent on fragile rivers fed by mountain snowmelt, found their lifelines shrinking as the climate grew more arid. The lower valleys were becoming dust bowls, and the old trails between them perilous. But the traders of the Silk Road did not simply vanish. They looked up to the towering ramparts of the Pamir and Tian Shan mountains. The very glaciers whose meltwater was failing the lowlands still held frozen reservoirs. By pioneering new, higher-altitude routes that followed these glacier-fed river valleys, they discovered a world of unexpected possibility. These mountain passes were brutally cold and difficult, but they offered two critical advantages. First, they provided a reliable, if challenging, corridor between the surviving oases. Second, they opened doors to entirely new communities and resources in the high valleys, pastures, minerals, and hardy peoples with knowledge of the peaks. This was not a retreat, it was a strategic ascent. The new mountain corridors demanded innovations in cold weather gear, sturdier pack animals like the yak, and sophisticated logistics for crossing high-altitude deserts. The crisis in the lowlands effectively accelerated the exploration and integration of the highlands, making the Silk Road network more geographically diverse and therefore more resilient. A route that could fail in one valley could now be compensated for by a pass in another range. The environmental pressure acted like a forge, hammering a scattered collection of trails into a truly continental web. What we witness in these moments is a profound truth about human systems under stress. Collapse does not always mean an ending. Often, it is the severe and necessary pressure that breaks an old, brittle form, allowing something more adaptable and intelligent to take its place. The map was not just redrawn by disaster, it was refined by it. The palaces of Crete were silent. On the island once ruled by the Minoans, the grand courtyards of Knossos stood empty, their vibrant frescoes fading under layers of fine, grey dust. A cataclysm had occurred not on Crete itself, but 70 miles to the north on the island of Thera. Its volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE was one of the most violent events in human memory, a blast that sent tsunamis crashing against Cretan shores and blanketed the eastern Mediterranean in a shroud of ash. For the Minoans, whose wealth was built on the bounty of the sea and the fertility of their land, the aftermath was a slow, suffocating collapse. The ash fall poisoned fields, stunting crops for years. The tsunamis devastated coastal ports and fleets, and the immense volume of material ejected into the atmosphere triggered a period of global cooling, shortening growing seasons across the region. A civilization that had mastered the art of peaceful commerce, that traded exquisite pottery, saffron, and olive oil from Egypt to Anatolia, found its ecological foundation shattered. The intricate palace economies, which centralized and redistributed goods, could not function when the goods themselves ceased to flow. The political and cultural dominance of the Minoans was over. But something crucial did not perish in the ash. The very concept they had perfected, the blueprint of maritime connectivity, remained. It was a ghost in the economic machine, waiting for a new hand to guide it. That hand belonged first to the Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland. They had long been trading partners and students of the Minoans, adopting their sailing technologies and their taste for far-flung commerce. In the power vacuum left by Thera's devastation, the Mycenaeans stepped forward. They did not simply copy the Minoan model, however, they adapted it with a harder edge. Their trade networks used the same sea lanes, but their palace centers, like Mycenae and Pylos, were more heavily fortified, reflecting a world where commerce and competition were closely linked. They traded Mycenaean pottery, olive oil, and textiles far and wide, even reaching Sardinia and southern Italy, extending the Mediterranean web the Minoans had woven. When the Mycenaean world itself later fragmented due to its own complex crises, the baton was passed again, this time to the Phoenicians. These master sailors from the coast of modern-day Lebanon took the paradigm of maritime trade and pushed it to its logical extreme. They were not builders of vast inland empires, but creators of a decentralized network of coastal city-states and trading colonies, from Carthage in North Africa to Cadiz in Spain. Their ships, built from the famed cedars of Lebanon, became the new capillaries of Mediterranean exchange, carrying not only goods but the very alphabet they invented, a tool of record-keeping that would become the foundation of Western writing. This sequential inheritance reveals a profound historical truth. The Minoan civilization fell, the Mycenaean civilization declined, but the Mediterranean as a connected economic space, as a network, never truly died. It persisted as a paradigm, a set of ideas about how to move goods by sea, how to establish colonies for trade, and how to communicate across cultures. Political powers rose and fell within this system, each putting their own stamp on it, but the system itself proved more durable than any of its temporary masters. The network was the real legacy, a resilient pattern of behavior that could outlive the specific people who first encoded it. This teaches us that sometimes the most important survival is not of a kingdom or a people, but of a way of thinking, a commercial logic so effective that it becomes the new normal for everyone who comes after. Across the ocean, a different kind of waterway carved its own story of resilience. The Mississippi River and its countless tributaries formed a hydrological superhighway that knitted together a continent long before European maps existed. For thousands of years, this liquid lattice moved more than just water. It carried ideas, rituals, and goods across thousands of miles, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. The most spectacular proof of this network's power was the rise of a city that rivaled any in the medieval world, Cahokia. Situated near modern-day St. Louis, Cahokia emerged as a colossal trading and ceremonial hub, its population swelling to perhaps 20,000 people at its peak around the year 1000. This was no accident of history. Cahokia's ascendancy coincided with the medieval warm period, a centuries-long climatic phase that brought warmer, more stable conditions to North America. This favorable weather supported bountiful harvests of maize, beans, and squash. providing the agricultural surplus needed to feed a dense, non-farming urban elite of priests, artisans, and administrators. The city became a gravitational center, drawing in exotic materials from every direction. Copper from the Great Lakes arrived to be crafted into ceremonial regalia. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico were transformed into sacred cups and beads. Flint from the Ozarks and mica from the Appalachians all flowed into the city's bustling plazas, exchanged for the grain, prestige, and spiritual authority that Cahokia projected. Its great earthen mounds, including the 100-foot-tall Monk's Mound, were not just architectural feats, they were monuments to a continent-wide web of influence, built literally from the soil of the river valley. But climates, as we have seen, are never permanent. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the favorable warmth gave way to a more erratic and challenging pattern, marked by intense droughts that could last for decades. The very agricultural abundance that fueled Cahokia's growth became precarious. A city of that immense size was exquisitely vulnerable to a succession of poor harvests. Social strain likely increased as resources grew scarce. Over time, the dense urban core began to disperse. The political and spiritual power that had been so brilliantly concentrated at Cahokia started to diffuse. Yet critically, the river network did not die with the city's prominence. The Mississippi and its waterways remained the indispensable highways they had always been. What changed was not the route, but who controlled the flow along it. As Cahokia's central authority waned, other mound centers located along different stretches of the great river system grew in importance. Places like Moundville in Alabama and Spiro in Oklahoma became new regional hubs, inheriting and adapting the cultural and trading practices that had once centered on Cahokia. They maintained the connections, exchanging the same shell, copper, and flint, but now in a more decentralized, resilient pattern. The network proved to be more durable than any single city upon it. This was a redistribution of power along permanent geographic lines, a testament to the idea that while a political center can collapse, the connective tissue of a landscape can endure, simply finding new centers of gravity. The river did not forget its purpose, it just found new voices to speak its language of trade. The stone walls of Kilwa-Kisiwani still whisper of two worlds. On the island city's eastern side, facing the deep blue of the Indian Ocean, grand coral brick mansions stood with their doorways open to the sea breeze, waiting for the monsoon winds to bring ships from Gujarat and Oman. Just a few miles inland, on the city's western edge, a different gate opened toward the continent's heart, where caravans gathered for the long trek to the gold fields of Great Zimbabwe. This was the genius of the Swahili coast, a civilization built not on choosing between the sea and the land, but on mastering the rhythm of both. Its resilience was a product of this deliberate duality, a constant negotiation between the predictable pulse of the ocean and the shifting fortunes of the mainland. The annual monsoon was their metronome. For centuries, Arab and Persian traders had known the schedule, the Kaskazi wind blowing steadily south from December to March, carrying their dhows laden with fine textiles, glazed ceramics, and glass beads. Then, from April to September, the Kusi wind reversed, filling the sails of Swahili merchants with ivory, mangrove timber, and ambergris, sending them north to return the favor. This was a long-distance conversation conducted over seasons, creating a cosmopolitan culture in the stone towns where Arabic script blended with Bantu grammar to form the Swahili language, and where Islam took root in grand mosques built from coral rag. But the ocean trade, for all its predictability, offered only one kind of wealth. The true source of the Swahili coast's legendary prosperity lay in its backdoor, the caravan routes that snaked into the African interior. While the monsoon connected them to the global economy, the caravans connected them to the continent's deepest treasures. These overland expeditions were monumental undertakings, organized by Swahili merchant families who acted as brokers between the coast and the inland kingdoms. They traded manufactured goods, cloth, and beads for the gold that fueled economies from Cairo to Venice, for the ivory that adorned palaces in India and China, and for other resources from the interior. This two-source economy created a powerful stabilizing effect. Imagine a season when the monsoon winds were unusually weak or delayed, stranding ships and disrupting the maritime supply chain. A purely coastal town might face immediate hardship, but a Swahili city-state like Kiloyear or Mombasa could pivot. It could draw upon the wealth still flowing from the interior, using gold reserves to weather the temporary maritime disruption. Conversely, if a severe drought or conflict disrupted the caravan networks from the interior, the city could rely on the uninterrupted sea lanes to import food and essential goods, maintaining stability until the inland routes reopened. Their hybrid nature was their armor. They were not passive ports waiting for others to come to them, nor were they landlocked kingdoms dreaming of the sea. They were active managers of a vast, interlocking system. This required a sophisticated social and political fabric. Swahili elites often married into the families of inland chieftains, weaving kinship ties that guaranteed safe passage and favorable trade terms. They developed a legal and commercial culture that could adjudicate disputes between a ship captain from Hormuz and a caravan master from the interior, creating a neutral ground for complex transactions. Their very architecture reflected this dual identity, with ornate, ocean-facing facades meant to impress foreign traders, and more practical, fortified structures facing the hinterland. The stone towns teach us that resilience can be a deliberate act of synthesis. By refusing to be defined by a single geography, by building their prosperity on the constant flow between two different worlds, they created a system where failure in one sphere could be absorbed by the strength of the other. They did not just survive at the edge of a continent, they thrived by becoming the vital hinge between its interior soul and the ocean's endless horizon. Deep in the Patane rainforest, the great stone calendars fell silent. The classic Maya collapse stands as one of history's most haunting mysteries, a slow-motion unraveling of a brilliant civilization across the southern lowlands. For centuries, these city-states had flourished, their power expressed in towering pyramids and intricate hieroglyphs that tracked the cosmos. Then, between the 8th and 10th centuries, the cities were gradually abandoned. The dominant explanation points to a series of severe, multi-decade droughts that crippled the agricultural base, leading to social upheaval and the dispersal of populations. It is a textbook case of a climate-driven disaster, yet if we listen closely to the silence, we hear a whisper of continuity. While the political and cultural heartland in the south faded, the very idea of Maya commerce did not die. It simply packed its bags and moved north. The recalibration of trade was both strategic and stunning. As the southern river systems grew unreliable and reservoirs dried up, attention shifted to regions with more dependable water sources. The riverways and cenotes of the Yucatan Peninsula, those natural limestone wells holding pristine groundwater, became the new lifelines, and along the coast, maritime circuits that had always operated in the background surged to the forefront. These coastal and riverine routes were inherently more resilient to the inland drought. A canoe trader paddling along the Gulf Coast or sailing between the islands of the Caribbean could access resources utterly independent of the failing rain-fed maize fields. They dealt in salt harvested from coastal lagoons, a commodity as vital as gold for preserving food. They transported honey, vanilla, cacao, and the vibrant feathers of tropical birds, goods that held immense value far beyond the Maya world. This shift in geography catalyzed a dramatic shift in power. In the north, a new kind of city arose, one built for this changed world. Chichen Itza is the most famous example. It was not merely a new capital, it was a cosmopolitan hub designed for exchange. Its architecture shows profound influences from central Mexico, evidence of a thriving connection with the mighty city of Chila and the Toltec world. A wide, paved causeway led directly from its central plaza to the edge of a sacred cenote, a physical testament to the city's reverence for its water source and a likely point for ritual trade. Chichen Itza's reach was vast. Archaeologists find obsidian from central Mexico, gold from Costa Rica and Panama, and turquoise from the American Southwest within its precincts. It sat at the nexus of a reorganized Mesoamerican map, connecting the Gulf Coast routes to the Caribbean circuits and overland trails into the highlands. This was not a collapse of trade, but a brilliant, pragmatic migration of it. The network shed its vulnerable skin in the drought-stricken south and reconstituted itself in the climatically buffered north and along the coasts. Power flowed to those who controlled these resilient pathways. So, while the classic Maya political order passed into history, the commercial and cultural impulses that defined them found a way to endure. They proved that a civilization's legacy is not always bound to its original cities, but can travel along the very trade routes it once established, seeking out the water and the connections that will allow its spirit to continue. A different kind of endurance was engineered not by merchants but by administrators. The vast Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, faced a monumental challenge: how to govern a world. Their answer was etched into the earth itself: the royal road. This was not a casual trade path worn by camel hooves, but a deliberately constructed instrument of power, a 2,500-kilometer artery of imperial will. Its resilience was not ecological but bureaucratic, a masterclass in logistical control that would whisper its lessons to empires for 1,000 years. At its heart was a network of way stations placed at precise intervals, each a fortress of predictability in an unpredictable landscape. A royal courier bearing urgent dispatches from the king would never have to search for shelter or fresh supplies. He would ride to the next station, exchange his tired horse for a rested one from the imperial stables, and continue his journey without pause. This system of relay riders could carry a message from Sardis to Susa in just 7 days, a journey that took a normal caravan 3 months. That speed was the empire's nervous system, allowing it to react to crises, suppress rebellions, and collect taxes with terrifying efficiency. But the genius of the system extended beyond speed. It was about standardization, the quiet magic of making the unfamiliar familiar. The road was patrolled, its bridges maintained by the state. Travelers carried official seals that granted them access to the way stations, creating a hierarchy of safe passage. For merchants, this formalized infrastructure was a double-edged sword. They paid taxes and tolls for its use, but in return, they received something priceless in the ancient world: security and a predictable schedule. A caravan master could plan his journey knowing where he would rest each night, where he could find water, and that the road was largely free from bandits, because to disrupt the king's road was to invite the king's wrath. During periods of climatic stress, when drought might push desperate communities toward raiding, this state-enforced corridor became a lifeline. While regional agriculture might fail, the movement of grain from fertile provinces to starving ones, or the flow of silver to pay soldiers, could continue. The road itself was a climate-controlled environment for commerce, its stability artificially maintained by imperial power. This top-down model shows us a contrasting blueprint for resilience. It did not emerge organically from merchant communities, but was imposed from above. Its durability was entirely tied to the strength of the state that built it. When the Achaemenid Empire fell to Alexander, the road's formal system decayed, though its path remained useful. Yet, its legacy was indelible. The idea of state maintained way stations, official passports for travelers, and protected trade corridors became part of the administrative DNA of Eurasia. Later Silk Road empires, from the Han to the Tang dynasties in China and even the Mongols, would adopt and adapt versions of this Persian model, establishing their own post stations and issuing their own travel documents. The lesson of the Royal Road is that resilience can also be architected. It shows how bureaucratic innovation, the mundane work of schedules, stamps, and stockway stations, can create a stable backbone that allows commerce to pulse through even the most turbulent times, proving that sometimes the most enduring path is the one that is most carefully governed. The coldest places on Earth held some of the warmest connections, far beyond the last forests of the taiga. In the relentless grip of the Arctic and subarctic, a different kind of commerce pulsed across the ice and tundra. Here, survival was not a given but a daily triumph, and the networks that formed were masterpieces of adaptation, trading not in luxuries but in the very materials that meant the difference between life and a long, dark end. These were the circumpolar exchange systems, and their resilience was forged in the heart of constant change. For the Dorset, Thule, and Inuit cultures, the concept of a marginal environment did not exist because this was the environment. Their entire worldview and technology were honed to its rhythms. The goods they traded were the currency of survival itself. Walrus ivory, strong and carvable, was crucial for making harpoon tips and tools. Furs from fox, caribou, and seal provided essential warmth in a world where winter never truly left. And perhaps most remarkable was the trade in meteoric iron, sourced from the few known deposits of nickel-iron meteorites like the Cape York complex in Greenland. This rare, pre-smelted metal was tougher than native copper or bone, and knowledge of its sources and the techniques to work it was precious, carefully guarded information passed along kinship lines. These networks spanned staggering distances across some of the planet's most challenging terrain. A piece of soapstone for a lamp might travel from Labrador to Baffin Island. A nugget of meteoric iron could find its way hundreds of miles from its point of origin. This was not haphazard wandering but deliberate, scheduled travel, timed to the migrations of animals and the freezing of sea ice. The kayak and the umiak, those elegant skin-covered vessels, turned open water and leads in the ice into highways. On land, the dog sled team was a revolutionary technology, allowing families and their possessions to move across the frozen landscape with efficiency and speed, pulling loads that would be impossible for humans alone. Their true resilience was tested by the planet's grand climatic swings. The medieval warm period, which brought drought to some regions, actually opened new opportunities in the north. Reduced sea ice extended hunting ranges for species like the bowhead whale, facilitating the rapid eastward expansion of the Thule people across the Arctic from Alaska to Greenland. Then, when the Little Ice Age descended with its advancing glaciers and longer, fiercer winters, these networks did not collapse, they recalibrated. As certain seal or caribou populations shifted their ranges, the hunting patterns and trade routes shifted with them. A community might rely more on stored knowledge of alternative fishing sites or intensify trade for resources from a region less affected by a particular seasonal shift. This incredible flexibility was rooted in a profound, non-written science of the land. Ecological knowledge was their most vital trade good, embedded in stories, songs, and the shared experience of generations. They understood the subtle signs of sea ice stability, the behavior of migratory herds, and the locations of vital caches and meeting places. Their social structures were equally adaptable, based on flexible family and hunting groups rather than rigid hierarchies, allowing for quick decision-making and the absorption of newcomers. What this northern world teaches us is a powerful counterpoint to the stories of southern empires. The most enduring trade systems were not always those built in the midst of plenty and then stressed by collapse. Some were woven from the very beginning in places of inherent variability, where resilience was not a feature added later, but the foundational principle of existence. Their map of power was not drawn in stone or on parchment. but in the memory of ice patterns and the shared need for a warm pair of mittens or a sharp harpoon tip. They prospered not by conquering their environment, but by listening to it so closely that they became an inseparable part of its rhythm, a lesson written not in silk but in snow. Their greatest invention was not a ship but a strategy. While other empires measured their power by the acres of land they controlled, the Phoenicians measured theirs by the harbors they commanded. Originating from the narrow coastal strip of modern-day Lebanon, these master mariners faced a world closing in on them. To the east, the relentless expansion of land-based empires like Assyria threatened their independence. To the west, the great upheaval of the late Bronze Age collapse had shattered traditional trade partners. Their response was neither conquest nor surrender, but a brilliant lateral move. They looked to the empty horizon and built a new kind of empire, one made entirely of dots on a map. From their home cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, they launched a centuries-long project of strategic colonization. Their goal was not to find empty land to farm, but to secure safe harbors, resupply points, and access to untapped resources. They planted settlements like stepping stones across the Mediterranean, from Cyprus and Malta to the north coast of Africa, the shores of Sicily and Sardinia, and all the way to the far edge of the known world at Cadiz in Spain. Each colony, from the mighty city of Carthage to a modest trading post, served a dual purpose. It was a safe haven for Phoenician ships, a place to repair hulls, take on fresh water, and wait out unfavorable winds. And it was a listening post, a node in a vast intelligence network that gathered information on local markets, political shifts, and new sources of wealth. This decentralized design was its core strength. There was no single capital whose fall would doom the network. If Tyre faced siege or hardship, the flow of commerce could simply pivot through Carthage or another colony. The system was redundant and adaptable, a web that could lose several strands without the whole structure failing. This maritime network proved astonishingly resilient to the very climate shifts that devastated agricultural societies. A prolonged drought might cripple an inland kingdom dependent on grain, but it had little effect on a Phoenician trader whose route was defined by wind and wave. A colony might face local food shortages, but it could always be resupplied by sea from another, more fortunate node in the network. Their entire existence was buffered against the shocks that broke terrestrial powers. Furthermore, their trade was deliberately diversified. They were not dependent on a single luxury good. A single ship might carry Lebanese cedar, Tyrian purple dye from sea snails, exquisite glassware, fine olive oil, and skilled metalwork. This meant that if demand for one product fell, others could sustain the commercial flow. Their most famous export, the alphabet, was perhaps the ultimate testament to their practical genius, a tool for efficient record-keeping that spread with their commerce and became the foundation of Western writing. The Phoenician legacy is a masterclass in strategic adaptation. They did not fight the changing world, they flowed around its obstacles. By building an empire of connections rather than territory, they created a system that could endure the collapse of kingdoms and the shifting of climates. Their model of trade-based colonization, focused on coastal hubs and maritime mobility, became a timeless blueprint, a whisper heard in the later networks of the Vikings, the Hanseatic League, and the mercantile empires of the early modern age. It proves that sometimes the most enduring power is not held by the one who owns the land, but by the one who knows how to move freely between its shores. A palace economy is a magnificent but fragile machine. Picture the great storerooms of Mycenae or Knossos, filled to the ceiling with olive oil, grain, and pottery, all carefully recorded on clay tablets by royal scribes. In this system, trade was not a free market, it was a state monopoly. The palace collected agricultural surplus from the surrounding lands, then redistributed it, commissioning crafts and controlling long-distance exchange to bring in prestige goods for the elite. This model created stunning art and monumental architecture, but it had a critical weakness: it was utterly dependent on stability. The entire edifice rested on two pillars: a predictable agricultural yield and an unchallenged central authority. When the climate shifted and those pillars began to crack, the machine seized up. A multi-year drought meant the storerooms were not filled. Without that surplus, the palace could not pay its workers, could not feed its soldiers, and could not commission the goods that fueled its external trade. The system, so efficient in good times, had no plan B. Its rigidity became its doom. In the shadow of those crumbling palaces, a different kind of commerce was already stirring. It was not orchestrated from a throne room, but emerged from countless individual decisions in dusty market squares and at crowded wharves. This was the world of the bazaar, the souk, and the funduck. Here, trade was not a centralized command, but a decentralized conversation. An independent merchant did not rely on a single king's harvest. He might carry a mix of spices from India, linen from Egypt, and glass from Syria. If a drought struck one region, raising the price of one good, he could adjust his margins on another. His risk was spread across many products and many routes. This network of individual actors created a collective resilience that no palace could engineer. The physical heart of this new economy was the Caravanserai. These were not palaces, but purpose-built way stations for trade, often located a day's journey apart along major routes. Within their fortified walls, a merchant from Baghdad could stable his camels, store his goods in a secure room, negotiate with a trader from Venice, and share a meal with a caravan master from Samarkand. The Caravanserai was a neutral, functional space dedicated solely to the flow of commerce. It belonged to no single empire but served all who traveled the road. This infrastructure supported the decentralized model perfectly. A merchant did not need permission from a distant pharaoh to use it. He just needed to pay a modest fee. If political turmoil closed one kingdom's borders, the caravanserais along alternative routes remained open, allowing the network to reroute itself organically. This shift from palace to bazaar represents one of the most profound economic adaptations in history. When the top-down system failed, the bottom-up system proved it could endure. The decentralized network had a capacity for improvisation that rigid hierarchies lacked. A single merchant could pivot quickly, forming new partnerships, testing new markets, and shifting his cargo based on rumor and price. While this world was certainly more unpredictable for the individual trader, fraught with personal risk for the overall system of trade, it was far more robust. The collapse of a palace was a catastrophe. The failure of one merchant, or even a dozen, was a loss absorbed by the network, a lesson learned and passed along through the gossip of the bazaar. Wealth and power began to diffuse from royal treasuries into the strongboxes of merchant families, whose influence was built on connections and liquidity, not land and titles. This economic redistribution did not just change who profited from trade, it changed what trade could survive. The pathways that carried 1,000 different dreams in 1,000 different saddlebags were the ones that could weather the long, dry centuries. Gold from the south built empires that glittered in the desert sun. The slow, relentless drying of the Sahara did not create a void. It created an opportunity for those who could bridge its new expanse. As the Trans-Saharan caravan networks solidified, they required stable, powerful termini at both ends to guarantee safety and organize the flow of goods. In West Africa, the kingdoms of Ghana and later Mali became those indispensable termini. Their power was not born from controlling fertile farmland, but from mastering the geography of exchange. Positioned at the southern edge of the desert, they commanded the critical transition point where the gold fields of the forest met the salt roads of the north. Ghana's rulers did not mine the gold themselves, but they controlled its access, taxing every ounce that passed into the caravans heading north. In return, they received salt, copper, textiles, and the horses that empowered their military. This trade, made possible by the very climate pressures that isolated them, generated staggering wealth. Arab chroniclers wrote of a court where even the royal dogs wore collars of gold, a testament to the prosperity flowing from the sand. When Mali rose to prominence, its legendary ruler Mansa Musa could embark on his famed pilgrimage to Mecca precisely because his treasury was filled by this same climate-resilient commerce. His journey, with its immense caravan of gold, was not just an act of faith. It was a geopolitical statement broadcast across the Mediterranean world, announcing the arrival of a power whose roots were watered by trade routes that drought could not kill. Across the Indian Ocean, a similar transfer of power was underway on the waves. The monsoon winds were a force of nature, but controlling the choke points where those winds funneled shipping required human cunning. The maritime empire of Srivijaya, based on the island of Sumatra, understood this perfectly. From around the 7th to the 13th centuries, it dominated the vital Strait of Malacca. Srivijaya did not conquer vast territories inland. It mastered the art of the toll. Its navy ensured that virtually every ship passing between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea stopped at its ports. In exchange for safety, fresh water, and harbor, merchants paid duties. This consistent, predictable revenue, drawn from a trade network that operated independently of continental droughts, bankrolled a kingdom of remarkable sophistication. Later, the Sultanate of Malacca would inherit this same strategic logic, becoming a cosmopolitan hub where Gujarati merchants, Chinese admirals, and Javanese sailors mingled, all contributing to the treasury of a sultanate whose power was purely commercial and naval. These were empires built on geography and breeze, their resilience and their authority flowing directly from their command of pathways that climate change had made more vital, not less. In the cooling climate of medieval Europe, a different kind of power coalesced from the necessity of trade. As the Little Ice Age brought shorter growing seasons and more volatile weather to the continent, the reliable movement of goods became a matter of survival for northern towns. From this pressure emerged not a kingdom, but a mercantile federation, the Hanseatic League. This was an alliance of trading cities, from Lübeck and Hamburg to Danzig and Riga, bound by mutual commercial interest. The League's genius was in creating a protected, standardized commercial zone across the Baltic and North Seas. They established trading posts or contours in foreign cities like London and Novgorod, negotiated collective trade treaties, and maintained their own fleets for protection. When climate stress threatened local food supplies, the Hanseatic network could ship grain from the fertile plains of Poland to starving populations in Norway or Flanders. Their power was so formidable that they could wage trade wars, impose blockades, and influence the politics of kingdoms. The League was a direct geopolitical product of a changing climate, a non-state actor whose authority was derived entirely from its control of resilient supply lines. It proved that in a world of increasing instability, the power to connect could rival the power to command. These stories reveal the final, decisive turn in the redrawing of the map. Climate collapse acted as a great filter, testing every pathway and every power. The empires that rose in its wake were not those with the largest armies or the most ancient bloodlines, but those positioned at the critical nodes of the networks that had proven durable. They were the gatekeepers of the New World. Ghana and Mali guarded the desert's golden gate. Srivijaya and Malacca held the key to the ocean's straits. The Hanseatic League commanded the northern seas. Their ascent was no accident. It was a direct consequence of a planet in transition. Commercial dominance and the political power it buys did not simply endure through the crisis. It was actively transferred to those who best understood the new geography of survival. This forces a humbling question about the nature of historical change. How much of what we call the rise and fall of empires is really just the old map crumbling, while a newer, more resilient one is already being traced in the movements of merchants and the wake of ships? The evidence for this great recalibration is not found in ancient ledgers but locked within the earth itself. How do we know the climate shifted, or that a caravan route moved from one valley to another? The story of these resilient networks is not built on guesswork, but on a modern scientific toolkit that acts like a time machine, allowing us to read the planet's own diary. One of the most powerful entries in that diary comes from deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. Scientists drill down and extract long cylinders of ice called ice cores. Within these frozen archives, tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere are preserved, and the chemical composition of the ice itself holds a record of past temperatures. More strikingly, layers of dust trapped in the ice tell a story of aridity. When a prolonged drought struck a region like the Sahara or Central Asia, increased atmospheric dust would travel globally and settle on the ice caps. By counting the annual layers, much like tree rings, researchers can pinpoint periods of intense, continent-wide drying with astonishing precision, directly correlating them with the abandonment of cities and the shifts in settlement patterns we find in the archaeological record. On a more human scale, dendrochronology or tree ring dating provides another exact calendar. In regions where ancient wood is preserved in shipwrecks, roof beams, or even as charcoal in a hearth, scientists can analyze the pattern of wide and narrow rings. Each pattern is unique to a specific sequence of wet and dry years. By matching the pattern from an archaeological sample to a master chronology for that region, they can determine the exact year the tree was cut. This tells us not only when a trading ship was built or a caravanserai was expanded, but also what the local climate was like during its construction. Was it a period of plenty or one of stress that might have prompted innovation? The very goods that traveled these routes now confess their origins through isotopic analysis. Every geographic region has a distinct chemical fingerprint in its soil and water, a unique ratio of elements like strontium, lead, or oxygen. These signatures are absorbed by plants and animals and become locked into materials. When scientists analyze a piece of pottery, a copper ingot, or even the tooth enamel of a donkey buried at a caravan stop, they can often match its isotopic signature to a specific mining region, clay bed, or water source hundreds of miles away. This turns a silent artifact into a witness, proving that tin from Cornwall reached the Mediterranean, or that a camel was raised in one oasis but ended its days in another, tracing the physical footprint of the network itself. From the macro to the micro, technology continues to unveil lost geographies. Satellite imagery and aerial photography, especially using sensors that see beyond visible light, can reveal subtle variations in soil moisture and vegetation. These tools have identified the faint, ghostly traces of ancient caravan tracks in the Sahara, paths invisible on the ground but clear from space, showing the precise corridors that linked oasis to oasis. Ground-penetrating radar can map buried foundations of forgotten way stations or ports without lifting a shovel, revealing the infrastructure of trade hidden beneath the sand or silt. This convergence of methods, ice cores recording global climate, tree rings dating local events, isotopes tracing individual objects, and satellites mapping lost landscapes allows historians to move from correlation to causation. We can now see that the year a major port city was expanded with new docks coincides with a period of favorable monsoons. We can observe that the style of pottery in a highland village shifts to an imported design just as the tree rings from the lowlands show a severe, decades-long drought. This is not speculation, it is forensic reconstruction. It shows us the tangible pressure of a changing climate and the tangible human response, turning the grand narrative of survival into a detailed chronicle written in dust, ice, wood, and stone. The story of these routes is no longer a legend, it is a case file, solved by reading the clues left in the very fabric of the world they traversed. The ancient caravans are gone, but their shadows stretch long into our modern world. The very pressures that reshaped those old maps are at work again today, testing our own global web of commerce in startlingly familiar ways. Our contemporary supply chains, those intricate systems that deliver everything from smartphones to strawberries, now face a volatile climate not unlike the one that challenged the Silk Road or the monsoon traders. Consider the Arctic, once an impassable barrier guarded by ice. As temperatures rise, that ice retreats, opening new shipping lanes like the Northern Sea route. This mirrors the ancient discovery of new mountain passes during drought, a strategic opportunity born from environmental change. Yet this new corridor also brings profound risk, threatening coastal communities and altering ecosystems in ways we are only beginning to understand. Simultaneously punishing droughts in critical agricultural regions, from the wheat fields of North America to the fruit orchards of Southern Europe, disrupt the steady flow of food exports, creating ripples of scarcity and price instability across the globe. Our system, for all its digital precision and containerized scale, reveals a core vulnerability. It is often optimized for efficiency, not resilience, creating single points of failure where a flood in one manufacturing hub or a drought in one breadbasket can stall economies worldwide. The lessons from those enduring ancient networks are not historical curiosities, they are a vital playbook. Their first principle was diversification. A monsoon trader never relied on one port or one commodity. Our modern equivalent means building supply chains with multiple sources and routes, ensuring that if one link fails, others can take the strain. The second lesson is redundancy, the deliberate overlap that seemed inefficient in calm times but became a lifeline in crisis. The ancient web of caravanserais provided this, offering alternative shelters and paths. Today, this translates to strategic stockpiles of essential goods, diversified energy grids, and support for local production capacities that can buffer global shocks. Perhaps the most profound lesson is in the value of adaptive infrastructure and preserved knowledge. The Garamantes who built underground canals and the Polynesian navigators who memorized star paths invested in understanding and working with their environment. For us, this means investing in climate-resilient ports, drought-resistant crops, and perhaps most importantly, safeguarding the local and indigenous knowledge of land and water management that high-tech solutions often overlook. Our hyper-connected global network, while a marvel of coordination, may in some ways be more fragile than the multi-stranded, low-tech networks of the past. A Roman grain ship and a Trans-Saharan caravan were not instantly linked. A failure in one did not automatically crash the other. Their very separateness provided a buffer. Our world has lost many of those buffers in pursuit of seamless efficiency. Recognizing this is not a call to abandon globalization, but to reimagine it with ancient wisdom in mind. We must build a system that is smart, connected, and efficient, but also decentralized, adaptable, and deeply informed by the ecological realities of our planet. The goal is not just to keep goods moving during the next crisis, but to shape an economic future where trade itself strengthens our collective capacity to endure. The silent, creeping enemy of climate change is once again at the gate. Will we heed the blueprint left in the sand, the ice, and the stars, or will we have to rediscover its truths through the hardship of our own collapse? So what emerges from the dust of these ancient roads is not a list of random traits, but a clear and repeatable blueprint. The survivors shared a specific architecture, a design for endurance that we can now assemble from the fragments. First, they were almost never single-mode. The most resilient networks were multimodal, weaving land and sea into a single, flexible fabric. The Swahili coast was the master of this, its prosperity flowing from the monsoon and the caravan in equal measure. A purely overland route could be blocked by a war or a sand dune. A purely maritime route could be becalmed, but a network that could pivot from camel to that could receive wealth from the desert and the ocean on the same city's docks, possessed a profound stability. This physical flexibility was matched by economic diversity. These routes traded in both dreams and necessities. They carried the silks and spices that adorned palaces and fueled fantasies, but their foundational hum was the trade in salt, grain, timber, and copper. The luxury markets might crash during a crisis, but the demand for life's essentials never vanished. This dual economy provided a financial buffer, ensuring the commercial infrastructure, the guides, the ships, the way stations never fell completely silent. Beneath the movement of goods flowed something even more vital, the currency of trust. The enduring networks were underpinned by powerful social and cultural ties. Shared belief systems like Buddhism along the Silk Road or Islam across the Sahara created common ethical frameworks and languages of law. Kinship connections between merchant families and local chieftains turned dangerous frontiers into corridors of safe passage. This was resilience built on human relationships, on the unspoken understanding that a fellow believer or a trading partner's cousin would offer aid at a distant well. It transformed a simple commercial path into a community worth preserving for its own sake. To navigate their changing worlds, these networks also became engines of technological adaptation. They did not cling to old ways when they failed. They invented new ones. When Mesopotamian rivers silted up, they built deeper drafted ships for the open Gulf. When the lowland trails of the Tarim Basin dried out, they pioneered higher, colder mountain passes. The lateen sail, the camel saddle, the kannat, the celestial star chart, each was a tool forged in response to environmental pressure, a deliberate upgrade to the system's software. Perhaps the most defining feature of the survivor's blueprint was its economic structure. These were not centralized, command economies like the brittle palace systems of the Bronze Age. They were decentralized, flexible, and often self-organizing. Power was distributed across countless merchants, caravan masters, and ship captains, each making individual decisions based on market whispers and weather reports. This model looked chaotic compared to a royal warehouse, but it was incredibly robust. The failure of one merchant, or even a dozen, was a loss absorbed by the network. The failure of a single palace king could end an entire system. This decentralized design meant the network could reroute itself organically, like water finding a new path around a rock. A war closes a border, so the caravans shift to a different mountain pass overseen by a different chieftain. A port becomes hostile, so the ships sail one bay further down the coast. The intelligence was local, immediate, and adaptive. Pulled together, these themes reveal the survivor not as a mighty fortress, but as a supple, intelligent organism. The resilient trade route was less like a stone highway and more like a mycelial network, a living, pulsing web beneath the surface. It could sense disturbances, reroute nutrients, and form new connections. Its strength was not in its rigidity, but in its responsiveness. It combined physical routes with social bonds, luxury goods with staple foods, technological innovation with ancient memory. Survival was never an accident. It was the deliberate, hard-won result of this confluence of strategic factors. So the map of power was redrawn not by the strongest army, but by the most adaptable network. This leaves us with a final, pressing reflection for our own interconnected age. In a world facing new forms of instability, are we building highways or are we cultivating ecosystems? The blueprint for survival is etched across continents and centuries. Our journey across deserts, seas, and steppes reveals a profound truth. Climate change is not a new adversary, but an ancient one that has continually sculpted human destiny. The trade routes that endured through collapse did far more than simply move goods. They became the invisible scaffolding upon which new worlds were quietly assembled. They redirected the flow of wealth, rerouted the paths of ideas, and ultimately redrawn the maps of power and culture while empires were busy looking the other way. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about logic, a specific, repeatable logic of resilience that we have now decoded. As we stand at the threshold of our own uncertain climatic future, these narratives are not mere artifacts of a distant past. They are essential guides, a forgotten operating manual for building systems that can withstand the pressures of a changing world. The lesson is clear: endurance favors the adaptable, the decentralized, and the deeply connected. It favors those who trade in both dreams and necessities, who build trust as diligently as they build roads, and who listen to the wisdom of the land and the sea. So let these ancient pathways inspire a new kind of ambition. Let us strive to build networks for our time that are not merely efficient, but are inherently enduring, that are woven with the same principles of diversity, redundancy, and deep ecological intelligence. The silent, creeping challenge is once again at our door. Will we choose to be the palace, rigid and magnificent, or will we choose to be the network, supple and alive? If this exploration into the hidden architecture of history resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the mysteries of our shared past. And we would love to hear from you. Which of these ancient trade stories, from the Sahara's golden caravans to the monsoon's whispering dhows, fascinates you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.